Bucknutters, welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Wednesday, December 7th, 2016. I am Dave Biddle, very happy to be joined by Patrick Murphy. Patrick, we had interviews last night with Ohio State players after practice. I want to start off talking about Curtis Samuel, Malik Hooker. Now, Malik Hooker had previously told Tim May of the Columbus Dispatch he was 100% coming back next season. This is a couple weeks ago, and he added, right now I'm 100%. And I thought that was the key phrase, right now. And then last night Malik Hooker was asked about it, and he backed off a little bit. You know, he still says right now I'm 100% coming back, but he is going to sit down with his family and discuss the situation afterward, whether or not to turn pro. Curtis Samuel said pretty much the same thing as Malik Hooker. Now, Curtis Samuel wasn't on the record saying he's 100% coming back. He just said he's not focused on that. He is going to make that decision after the season. So give your take on that. I tend to think both guys are definitely gone and should go, but just give me your take on all that.
Yeah, I agree with your take that both guys probably end up going, and that makes sense for both of them. If you look at what they've done this season, you can argue that this is kind of both of their first years starting, and maybe they could, develop a little bit by coming back, but it's such a violent game, a dangerous game, a game we love, but when the money's there, it's hard to argue that a kid shouldn't go take it. Both of these guys, I think, have proven a lot this season. With that said, there are, every once in a while we get a guy that really loves college and really loves college football and things like that. And, maybe one of them or both of them see, a chance to get better, a chance to come back and continue their college experience. Maybe for one reason or another, they, want to further their education and don't want to put that off until after their NFL careers. So I think, while I believe that Malik, when he said, he's right now 100% coming back, it wouldn't surprise me if he sits down and realizes, okay, this is the time to go. And same with Curtis, I think if either of them right now said, okay, I'm gone, Buckeye fans would be kind of upset because they want their heads in it. And while I'm sure they, had some talks among their friends and their families already about it, you don't want that kind of distraction, going into this game coming up here against Clemson. You want them dialed into, what they have to do to get a win there and then move on to the national championship game.
Yeah, very well said. I think that's, credit to both those young men. I mean, they said the right things, but it felt like that they actually meant what they were saying, that they're focused on Clemson, they're laser focused on Clemson, they're going to worry about everything else after the season. And for fans that might be wondering, what else are the players going to say? Are they going to tell you for sure they're coming back? Are they going to say that they're leaving? I will say they probably won't tell you they're leaving, although it has happened before. But 2 years ago, I'll give an anecdote here of players saying they're going to come back for sure. Taylor Decker was asked about it before the Alabama game a couple years ago. He said he was definitely coming back for his senior year. Adolphus Washington was asked about it before the Alabama game. He said he was definitely coming back. So there have been times where guys said they're definitely coming back and don't, say, I'm going to wait till after the season. But right now, I'm kind of like what Malik Hooker's doing. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and even a guy like, it's not an apples for apples comparison, but a Leonard Fournette down at LSU, has already announced that he's going pro, and they still have a bowl game. Now, obviously, it's not a playoff game, and everyone already thought Fournette was gone. He's dealt with injuries and things like that. So the example's a little different, but there's also that where guys are like, I'm going to go. And, even a guy like Joey Bosa last year, while he didn't come out and say that he was going, he did make a couple references to not playing with Nick necessarily as the year went on and stuff like that. So you do kind of get hints. Neither of those guys, aside from, like you said, Malik's interview with Tim, have really said anything about it. So I think the possibility is still there. But like I said, I think they're probably gone.
And speaking of last year, Ezekiel Elliott did say that this was going to be his last year. Last year when he said after the Michigan State game, he's like, I'm not going to come back next year. This is my last home game. I mean, he just put it out there. And he wasn't even afterwards, and I totally believe him on this, he wasn't even trying to declare for the draft then. He was just saying what was common sense. Everybody knew Ezekiel Elliott was not going to come back for his senior year. He was just stating a fact that he felt like everybody knows I'm leaving, He didn't think it would be that big of a deal. But so that's another example of a player that did declare before the season was over. But as you mentioned, it's different, I think, when you're playing for the national championship as opposed to playing what's really a consolation bowl game. I mean, so we'll see what happens, but I like the way Curtis Samuel and Malik are handling their business right now. Switching gears, I want to ask you about Luke Fickell. There was a story in Cleveland.com, very interesting read about Luke definitely wants to be a head coach now and thinks this is the time. So it sounds like this might be his last year at Ohio State, at least as an assistant coach under Urban Meyer. Who knows? Maybe down the road he'll come back. Maybe not. Maybe he won't get hired as a head coach. But reading the Cleveland.com piece, Patrick, it sure sounds like he wants to be a head coach. And this is no surprise because for those that don't know, Luke changed agents over the offseason. That was that spoke volumes to me that he changed the agents. I felt like that was, he was signaling it felt like it was now or never to be a head coach. Just your thoughts on all that. Do you think Luke will be a head coach, and just your general thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, reading that article, the biggest thing I took away from it was that he wants the right situation between, him, his wife Amy, and I believe they have 6 children. He was saying that he doesn't want to go somewhere to then move again. So as Doug Langreese, who wrote the article, put it, that kind of eliminates like MAC jobs where guys go for 2 years and then move on to bigger jobs or, get fired if they don't do well. He wants to kind of cement himself somewhere for a while, raise his family there. That kind of narrows down the list a little bit of what might be possibilities. And we've seen some jobs get filled here, over the last few days. I know the one job that is mentioned in here that's still available is Cincinnati. Which would seem to make sense. But as for Luke, just as a head coach, getting to know him, interviewing him, talking to him, I was at a high school football game this year, where he was on the sideline and we chatted for a few minutes. Getting to talk to him in those type of situations, he seems like a guy who is ready. And, I don't know if that was the case in 2011 when he was kind of thrust into the job after the resignation of Jim Tressel. He's experienced a lot more. He's been, while he'd been through the same kind of things under Coach Tressel, now he's experienced it under Meyer, and he has the experience of that along with Tressel and John Cooper, who was his head coach. So I think he's kind of combined those things, and this was touched on in the article, and, he feels ready, and maybe he didn't feel ready a few years ago. And if you know Luke at all, comfort's a big thing, and I think that the fact that he's ready to put himself out there and really become the head coach at a program is not only good news for him and his family, but likely for the program he goes to, because I think he's going to do a good job wherever he ends up.
Ohio State favored by 3.5 points over Clemson. I was just looking at the point spread to make sure it hasn't changed. It actually opened at 3 points. It's moved to 3.5 points, so not much movement. But it's funny. I'll hear some analysts talking about like Ohio State. They almost talk like Ohio State's a huge underdog without recognizing the fact Ohio State's actually favored in this game. But putting the point spread aside, just your thoughts on this matchup. Obviously, 2 teams that are going to be putting a ton of players in the NFL over the next couple of years, very talent-rich programs, rematch of the Orange Bowl from 3 years ago. Just from Ohio State's standpoint, do you think this is a incredibly tough matchup? Do you like the matchup? Just your thoughts on the matchup.
From an entertainment standpoint, I think, whether you're an Ohio State fan, a Clemson fan, or neutral, I think it's a good one, just because I think there'll probably be some points scored. Yeah, I do. I think that Ohio State, everyone keeps pointing to, Ohio State's offense struggling these last few games. Clemson's offense has really come on late. They kind of muddled through the beginning of the season, had some close games, and these last few games have been more blowouts. While they didn't blow out Virginia Tech in the ACC title game, they did kind of have control of that game. Anytime Virginia Tech got close, Clemson marched right down the field and scored. So, I think that part of the reason you mentioned that the experts are so high, they got to see Clemson last, and you've seen this offense be explosive recently where Ohio State hasn't. The one thing that I will point to is the defenses of both teams. They say defenses win championships. The Ohio State's defense hasn't let down all year. They continue to be one of the most dominant units in the country, and probably one of the better groups, if not the best unit that Deshaun Watson and this Clemson offense is going to face. When I look at Clemson's defense, I haven't really broke them down very, very closely yet, but having watched several of their games this year, I don't see that same level. Now, I do think the offense is firing on higher cylinders than Ohio State's right now. But I think maybe once we get indoors, we've seen JT and this offense come alive in good environments, weather-wise. I think maybe that could equalize things a little bit here. Plus the time to prepare, I think that's a big thing. Not that Dabo Swinney doesn't do well with that, but we know that Urban Meyer is phenomenal when he's got, 25, 24 days now, I think, to get these guys ready.
All right, let's move on to basketball. If I sound downtrodden, that's because I am, not just because I'm battling through a cold or I can't even breathe through my nose. I'm literally a mouth breather, Bucknutters, right now. But I'm also disappointed about Ohio State basketball because I covered Thad Matta's introductory press conference. Even before that, when he was at Xavier, I was thinking this guy would be great at Ohio State. I hope Ohio State gets this guy. And then it happened. And then not only did it happen, he leads Ohio State to the Big Ten championship, outright Big Ten title, his second year. And they're picked like 6th or 7th in the league. Terrence Stiles, Big Ten MVP. No one thought that was possible. And then he takes it to the next level. He gets great, Greg Oden, Mike Conley, that whole great, the Thad Five. They go to the national championship game, the second best season in school history. 2006, 2007 lose to Florida in the national championship game. But like I said, it's the second best season in school history other than the national championship back in the 60s. And he just took the program to levels that I never thought it could get. Now, things have just changed so much, Patrick. You were covering the game last night. Ohio State loses 79-77 to Florida Atlantic. And, sometimes teams with, not a big name can actually have a good team. They could be, maybe you haven't heard of them or you don't know much about their program, but they're a good mid-major. Well, Florida Atlantic was 2-5 coming in to Value City Arena last night, and they beat Ohio State. I have to ask this question. Is the end near for Thad Matta? It feels like it.
Yeah, I certainly get that. I would say this. I think that if the end is near for Thad Matta, it's going to be on Thad's terms. He's, as you kind of detailed in there with your introduction with him, and it goes beyond that with the Aaron Crafts and getting to the Final Four again and things like that. He's brought this program back to heights that it hasn't been. And, this is a football school. While we'd love to see, all the programs do well, football comes first here. That's where the interest is. That's where the money goes. Basketball does well, but it's hard to do both. We've seen programs across the country do both for periods of time, but rarely do you see one sustain it over 5 to 10 years. So I think what Thad has done has been pretty remarkable here. Let me say that first. And I think that he is being rewarded with that. He's had these last, year and now the beginning of this season, even though it's, aside from last night, it's been a fairly good start to the year. He's kind of struggled through things, and he's been given some patience by, the athletic director, Gene Smith, and people that are in charge of those things. As for the team itself, last night was the first time that I looked at it and was like, wow, this feels like last year again. And I covered last season, and that was a big debacle. I asked both the two players we got, Jaquan Lyle and Deshaun Tate, and Coach Matta about, did this feel like last year? Or does this have this sense? And, they said no, they don't think it was. Deshaun Tate pointed to the problem of getting up for games. Just 3 games ago, this team was on the road against Virginia and had a 16-point lead at one point, the number 6 team in the country. And, so this team has that talent. And last year's team did too. We saw them beat Kentucky. But, I think this team is much better placed to do something, especially when it comes to the Big Ten. The thing that really struck me about what Deshaun Tate said was that they have issues getting up for some of these games that aren't these big games. And, he pointed to the energy of Virginia. They knew they were the underdogs in that game. The crowd was rocking. They really had something to play for. And, at the shot on a Tuesday night, there's hardly anyone in the building. It's just not that same atmosphere, and it's hard for these guys to kind of get up. Now that's on them. They need to do better than that. And a little bit on the coaching staff. I don't know how much you can get these guys pumped up to play Florida Atlantic, but clearly, they need some help with that. So, while I think that last night's loss was bad, very bad, it's going to set them back a little bit here. I don't think that this is going to be an ongoing thing. Now they do have a tough stretch here. They play UConn and UCLA in the next few games. So, record-wise, it may not look great after a few games, but they set themselves up much better than they did last year with the non-conference. I think they'll go into the Big Ten and be fine, and then, you get to games that really matter. And we've seen what this team can do when the games do matter, whether it's on the road and in tough environments, or once, you finally start getting the students in the Schottenstein Center consistently, you get a little bit more atmosphere. That place never is crazy, unless it's a real big game. But, I do think that plays a part, and it's unfortunate because a team with, multiple juniors and a senior and things like that shouldn't have this issue. But, I do think the talent that is there will eventually win out.
You said if the end is near, it'll be on Thad's terms. What if it goes south this year like it did last year, where they missed the NCAA tournament, and frankly, right now, I still think they have a chance to make the NCAA tournament. I'm not writing off this team. I just have this feeling like this is Thad's last year. Maybe it'll be him walking away. But let's say he doesn't want to walk away, but this season goes south. Maybe Gene Smith doesn't fire him, but boosters maybe pressure Gene Smith to make a move and maybe force a resignation with a healthy buyout. Something you could envision something like that with Thad, maybe not getting technically fired, but almost having to, be forced to resign, anything like that if this season continues to go south.
It's possible. I mean, obviously anything's possible. The biggest thing I think with Thad is that his health isn't great in terms of, I think day to day he's fine, but in terms of being a basketball coach, he's not able to do as much. He can't move around as well due to issues with his back and legs and stuff. But I think that, if the stress of this starts to become too much, I can see him calling it quits, possibly still being involved in Ohio State basketball or, college basketball in general. I know he loves this game. He's not nearly as old as he looks, or, sometimes looks like when he's walking around on, sitting on the sidelines when he probably wants to be standing. But, it's certainly possible, especially if they miss the tournament back-to-back seasons. The pressure's certainly going to start to get to him. We've seen him. He made the joke last year that he's not wearing a tie because he's worried he's going to strangle himself with it. I asked him about it this year. Are you going to wear the tie again this year? If you, kind of tongue in cheek, but, he was like, I don't know. And he got what I was saying, but, at the same point, there was a lot of stress put on him last year that he wasn't used to. And he's been through years that weren't as good as, the highs that you mentioned. But, you can tell that it's starting to get to him a little bit. And, in people that are there regularly and talking to them, no one would be surprised if after any season coming up here, regardless of how the team does, if he looks to step down. But, the pressure of all this, like you said, boosters and things like that, it's possible. But like I said, I still think this team is in a position to make the tournament. They did what they were supposed to do last year in the Big Ten to make the tournament, winning 11 games and getting to 20 wins overall. It was just those 2 losses in the non-conference. And fortunately right now, while they have 2 losses, one of them comes to a really good program and the other one was last night. So it's about what they do going forward here.
Great stuff as always out of Patrick Murphy. Thank you, Patrick, and thanks to all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. Hope everyone has a great day. I'm going to go take a lot of cold medicine. Let's hear some Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.